Let's get hard.
Hello, Hardyaners. I'm back for another solo episode. And this one, look, I've fully going to put my hand up and admit that I reckon a couple of these episodes, I think you guys have been saying you enjoy them. And you said you can hear the authenticity and the the anger, I guess, in some of them. And that's probably something I'm going to change going forward is, not getting too angry. Maybe just showing a little discernment about the way that some of these articles and some of these things have been written, some of the narratives that are being pushed. And today I'm going to do an episode based on something I've been very passionate on over the years, and you guys have probably heard me talk about quite a lot, and that's vaccines. And this is not going to be an episode of advice or what I think you should do. My opinion, full disclosure, is that vaccinations are something that need to be investigated and should not just be blanketly accepted as something that is bulletproof, that doesn't cause injuries to specific people and doesn't necessarily have long-term effects that can affect you in a number of ways chronically. I don't think they should be disregarded either. I think surely we can have a world where we have both, because we want a world where everyone's healthy, everyone's safe. And why can't we have a system where we have vaccines that are both safe and effective? And I'm not here to say that all vaccines are unsafe and that you shouldn't or should get vaccinated. That's not what I'm going to really talk about. Today, I want to talk about why people are no longer trusting vaccinations and some of the data that needs to be talked about. Some of the things that have come up specifically over the last 4 or 5 years, to create an environment of distrust. Now, we naturally, I think, have this distrust for authority, specifically at the moment where we continuously are exposed to lies, manipulation, corruption, and the prioritization of corporate interests and financial interests politically seems to be just everywhere. And so it makes sense that we completely lose trust in authorities, whether at medical or otherwise. And something that we've been saying for quite a while, not just us, many others have been saying, is that some of this data that we've been presented over the years is tainted with a conflict of interest. And we're going to touch on some of that today. But firstly, I want to let's start talking about this distrust in vaccines and its decline. Now, I did I touched on it a couple of weeks ago in one of my first solo episodes where I read the article that there is in fact a dip in uptake of vaccines, and the hesitancy has increased. And I said, and I still stand by this, the reason is most certainly because we've been lied to for so many years through the COVID pandemic. And the ways that was handled, the ways that real truth was silenced in a horrific way, in a very, very publicly obvious way. These things were being shut down. Conversation was being silenced around things that deserve cross-examination. We can't have a central authority making one decision for every person on the planet. And that's what seemed to be happening. And we're going to go through a few things. So firstly, I just want to actually run you through the actual drop in rate. So actual vaccination rates and objective behavior. In 2020, in 2020, we had a peak trust in vaccinations, 2020. there was 95% coverage. This is in Australia, but you can probably draw parallels around most countries around the world. So in 2020, we had a 95% coverage. In 2025 to 2026, we now have a 93% coverage in 5-year-olds and 90% coverage in 2-year-olds, which is a noticeable drop since COVID. That's a 2 to 5% drop, which is, when you scale up to millions of people, that's a large amount of people not getting vaccinated. The change over time is about 2 to 5%. Distrust in providers has increased from 6.4% to 8.8%. People distrust the providers. And safety concerns have increased from 6% to 8.3%. That's from 2020, so in 6 years. This is the most dramatic change. So parents, in regards to childhood vaccines, 43% of parents have concerns. They delay or selectively vaccinate, that's a clear, measurable drop post-COVID, and hesitancy has become mainstream. 43% of parents have concerns. Now, I certainly had my concerns going into my first child, and full disclosure, we will not be vaccinating my second child. Not that I'm suggesting that's why my daughter has autism or anything, but I had my concerns. We did do our research into things, and sadly, and I want to say sadly, we succumbed, I think, to the pressures financially that are put on you as a parent when choosing whether or not to vaccinate your child. In Australia, we have a concept called the no jab, no pay, where subsidies regarding your childcare and daycare are not, or are they are withheld from you. So the full amount, we have a system in Australia where we subsidise people sending their children to childcare centres, and it doesn't cost very much because of those subsidies. But if you do not vaccinate your child, you have to pay the full amount, which when you put them against each other, whether it is worth going to work for the full day and paying for your childcare, they're basically the same. You're almost paying for one day by going to work. It's almost not worth it. And that is essentially what I would call coercion. You are financially putting pressure on parents to make a decision to keep their jobs. They need to to keep their jobs and to keep. I'm trying to be tactical of the way. Basically, you're coercing parents into making a decision through financial pressures, and I think that's disgraceful, disgusting, and one would argue that's breaking the Nuremberg Code. You are not meant to pressure anyone into a medical decision based on coercive behaviours. But I digress. We're going to go into where I think we see the main drop in trust, and then I'm going to go through why there actually should be a concern for a drop in trust, because this isn't just why. This is that there's probably grounds for conversations. Okay. Firstly, I'm just going to read an article that is obvious to anyone who's been awake to what's going on over the last few years, but it's good to see someone finally being held accountable. Hopefully this goes further up. Former Fauci aide charged with conspiring to evade COVID-related records requests. A former senior official at the National Institute of Health has been indicted on obstruction of justice and conspiracy charges for allegedly concealing federal records about research into viruses like the one that caused the COVID pandemic. David Morenz, 78, was indicted by a federal grand jury in Greenbelt, Maryland, earlier this month on 3 felony counts for allegedly using Gmail account to hide official communications about controversial federally funded projects studying coronaviruses in bats. The indictment was released on Monday when Morans made a brief appearance in court and was released. So according to the indictment, Morans sent and received emails on his private account in order to thwart Freedom of Information Act requests seeking information about so-called gain-of-function research. So that report was from Politico. Now, this guy worked for Anthony Fauci. He was the main advisor, one of the main advisors. And the concern here, firstly, is this is about the origin of COVID, which still, and people can argue that they will say, oh, just move on, let it go. We're still suffering the consequences of that, not only medically, but financially. Look at the cost of living in every country that is increased exponentially. That is as a result of the actions taken by most governments around the world to keep us, quote unquote, safe. And, you know, printing trillions of dollars of extra money to be able to keep our citizens at home and give them welfare has diluted the value of our dollar. And now what used to, like $100 purchasing power is around $75 now. In 6 years, we've lost the value of our dollar, as well as the cost of living and things going up in price. Coupling that, we're in a situation where financially we are seeing the cure was worse than the disease. Medically, we could be seeing the same thing, and I'll get to that shortly. And this is why we are seeing a decline. I want you to listen to a clip now by Senator Ron Johnson, who is a part of the Senate hearing for RFK, doing an investigation into these things. Okay.
Put up this graph. Because of your radical transparency, I've got close to 11 million pages. You know, we uncovered they hid the signal on myocarditis. We also just recently uncovered that they also hit a signal on ischemic stroke for people over 65, the tail end 2022, 2023. They hid both signals.
For those of you just listening at home, I'll explain what the graph is. Even if you're watching, it's not going to be on the screen. So the graph is a graph that runs parallel. It goes from about, from their data, a few hundred adverse reactions for vaccine-related deaths. So not adverse reactions, vaccine-related deaths. You have a few hundred every year. And then in 2020 or 2021, the spike, I mean, if you can see, you can't see on my phone right there. Maybe I'll put that on the screen. But regardless, the spike is huge. It's a flat line to fucking climbing Mount Everest. Okay? So just to give you a bit of context there, what he's talking about.
Downplayed them. But what is most alarming, and we'll be holding a hearing on this next week, I've got a draft report. They were made aware, Peter Marks was made aware on March 26th of 2021 that the inventors of the algorithm that analyzes the VAERS data was going to mask adverse events. He was told that by using a different system, they had uncovered 49 examples of extreme masking, 25 significant adverse events, including sudden cardiac death, Bell's palsy, pulmonary infarction. So this report will be issued in conjunction with that hearing. Again, I didn't need a sophisticated mathematical model to tell me that we had safety signals screaming at us. This chart shows the deaths associated with vaccines all the way going back to 1990 when VAERS started, a couple hundred a year. Anaphylactic shock, that type of thing. 2021, over 20,000 deaths, and for 5 years, FDA has been saying, we don't.
So it went from a couple of hundred deaths every single year due to vaccinations, and in 2021, over 20,000 reported instantly. Just ignored. completely ignored.
A signal. This was a signal screaming at us that to this very day, we are covering up. So there are a bunch of people involved in this cover-up that still continue to work within the HHS, CDC, FDA. I want your commitment that those people will be made available for interviews. I'll have to subpoena others. I'm going to dig into this massive government.
You have my commitment.
Thank you.
So that's RFK saying he's got the commitment to look into these things, and that is what should be happening. When you see a fucking spike in data like that, it doesn't matter or not whether or not correlation equals causation, blah, 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 blah. All that bullshit. Everyone knows those arguments. It doesn't matter. It needs to be investigated. And this is contributing to the fall in the rise in distrust. This is the exact reason is because people are completely disregarding these spikes in data and saying, nothing to see here. Nothing to see. A couple of 100 to 20,000 is big. Whether it's fucking anecdotal or not, it doesn't matter. Okay. My girl, Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard. She is, anyone who listens to the podcast knows how much I love Tulsi Gabbard. She's a fucking straight shooter. And I think she should be the next president of the United States. I truly believe she is a representative of all that is and should be in the political world. I think. So I've been wrong in the past. But I want you guys to hear her talking about the investigation into gain of function where she's talking to, I think she's talking to...
Yeah. But the thing that we
Megyn
are
Kelly.
working with Jay Bhattacharya, the new NIH director, on with, as well as Secretary Kennedy, is looking at the gain of function research that in the case of the Wuhan lab, as well as many of these other biolabs around the world, was actually U.S. funded and leads to this dangerous kind of research that in many examples has resulted in either a pandemic or some other major health crisis.
Well, let me ask you specifically, because we already know that EcoHealth Alliance was partnering with this Wuhan lab to do gain of function research.
That's right.
We just have never been able to have somebody say, it was that exact experiment that led to this COVID bug. But have we gotten there? What's the new thing that you're digging in on?
We are working on that with Jay Bhattacharya and look forward to being able to share that, hopefully very soon.
Okay.
That specific
link.
Correct, between the gain of function research and what we saw with COVID-19.
I mean, that would be extraordinary because just so the audience knows, if that's true, if it was Peter Daszak's research with the Wuhan so-called bat lady that caused this pandemic, then we did fund it. Then Anthony Fauci helped fund the pandemic.
The thing that he denied over and over and over to Senator Rand Paul's questioning.
That's right.
So, again, back to the origin. It's very important. It's not worth forgetting because the people who created this situation, saying fucking jumped from a bat to a human in a wet market. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And in the same fucking city where this thing broke out, where the whole pandemic began, started with where they said was 300 meters away from the very place where they were researching coronaviruses. They were actually doing the research. For those of you who don't know, gain of function research actually means experiments where scientists modify an organism, often a virus or bacteria, to give it new enhanced properties. So they basically put a disease on steroids. What kind of functions get changed are the transmissibility, the virulence, how severe it is, a host range, so what species it can infect, and the immune escaped. Why scientists do it is to predict how viruses might evolve. So basically they're saying that we're doing this to see if we can get things to prevent or have things in place for the future just in case said event occurs, which in this case has most probably caused said event, which is obviously a concern. Strangely enough, now this guy who has been indicted He's an advisor for Anthony Fauci. Anthony Fauci was preemptively pardoned by the Biden administration days before Joe Biden finished up. Days before. He was preemptively pardoned from 2014 to 2024. Anything that happened in that 10-year period, he is pardoned for. He cannot be held accountable. Make of that what you will. Another interesting thing, and these are things like where we bleed into conspiracy, but at times you start to go, well, is this becoming too obvious? Professor Francis Boyle found dead only days after he agreed to testify against Bill Gates and Pfizer CEO over dangers of mRNA COVID-19 vaccines. Professor Francis Boyle, who wrote the law that defines biological weapons and helped draft the 1989 Biological Weapons Anti-Terrorism Act, has died only days after agreeing to testify against Bill Gates and the Pfizer CEO, Albert Bourla, over the dangers of the mRNA COVID-19 vaccines. Boyle agreed to testify under oath in a Dutch court. He was prepared to give sworn testimony that mRNA technology was paid for, developed, financed, and conceived by the Pentagon and its research institute, DARPA. He was the single greatest legal authority on bioweapons legislation in the world. And he died days after he agreed to testify against Bill Gates and the CEO of Pfizer. Interesting. And when we see things like this, it's hard not to draw suspicious conclusions. Why wouldn't you just kill someone if it threatened your own future? I mean, it makes sense to me. Here's something from Dr. Peter McCullough. We've had Dr. Peter McCullough on the podcast before, and I'm going to try and get him on again shortly to talk about what's being revealed at the moment, because it's such a big part. Well, there's a lot going on over in America in regards to these hearings. But I want you to hear Dr. Peter McCullough talk about what his concerns were.
80% of Americans took a vaccine. 20% didn't. The vaccine was never safe enough for me to take. Messenger RNA, devised by Pfizer and Moderna, has been chemically modified to be unassailable to enzymes in the body to be broken down. The messenger RNA is found in the human heart of people who die after the vaccine. It's found in the brain. The spike protein is found everywhere in the body. 3 studies now show
it was meant to just stay in your arm, was what they were saying. It was meant to stay localized. Carry on, Dr. Peter McCullough.
the spike protein is circulating in the blood for 6 to 9 months after people take the shot. It's the lethal part of the virus in the vaccinated. It's circulating in the blood. And then they take a booster, they get more circulating in the blood. It is a killer protein. It cannot be safe. It was not safe by design. Safety trumps efficacy. We cannot tolerate false drug claims. And we saw a poster behind Senator Blumenthal making a false drug claim that vaccines saved millions of lives, specifically the COVID vaccine. When someone signs consent for a vaccine, Senator Blumenthal, does the consent form say it's going to save their lives? Of course it doesn't. There's never been a prospective, randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial ever showing that COVID-19 vaccines reduce mortality or hospitalization. There's not even a valid non-randomized study. We can't allow false drug advertising to be put up on a poster behind one of our public servants. We cannot accept that.
That is incredible by Dr. Peter McCullough. And what he's talking about there is the fact that there has been no double-blind controlled placebo studies on whether or not there was an effect on or saving lives. There hasn't. And the things that are not brought into consideration are things like natural immunity, which, mind you, is 27 times more effective than the actual dose, having the shot. 27 times more effective. Yet in Australia, and actually, no, I digress because I want to talk about that later because that's resulted in something pretty bad. Here's another bit of information that started to come out around these vaccines. Just one shot increases your risk. Official government data on nearly 300,000 individuals tracked for 30 months found that mRNA COVID vaccines increase the risk of breast cancer by 54%, bladder cancer by 62%, ovarian cancer by 71%, uterine cancer by 77%, and colon cancer by 35%. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. We're only just starting to see what's happening here. We have no idea, zero idea, the long-term effects of something that hasn't been studied correctly. No idea. We don't even look. I don't want to make claims. Well, maybe I am making claims as it is, but if we look at things, so in my research into being a parent for the first time, I was looking into vaccines, and some of the things that I was even looking into were flu vaccines. Everyone was pushing for this flu vaccine. We see it now. We see this fucking huge push by the government now. Nasal. They're doing nasal vaccines now where you can take it nasally, and they're ridiculous. But my research into the flu vaccine showed me that every year around the world, there was about 650 to 700,000 people die conservatively because of the flu. Now, prior to the COVID, this was used as a reason to show how dangerous the flu is. 700,000 people a year die from the flu. And then during COVID, that went away. Like no one died. No one died of the flu. And then we saw, by their numbers, 1 million or so died a year from COVID. I think in its peak year, 2.5 million people died of COVID. Now, obviously, that's bigger. But then you're always obviously disregarding the of versus with. Like people who were dying with COVID were being counted as a death of COVID, which is incorrect. But people who die of the flu or with the flu aren't counted as a death of the flu. And this is a thing that concerns me, the way that they were counting that, for example. And I know they're very different diseases. If you counted flu deaths with or versus of, wouldn't you find probably similar elevated numbers? Not disregarding the fact that there's a disease going on and they're killing a lot of vulnerable people. But you also have to consider the fact that the average age of death for people in COVID was higher than the average lifespan of a human. I think, going top of my head, it was around the average lifespan of a person is 77.5 years, and the average age of death of someone in COVID was like 78.3. So it's even higher. So my point is that the vulnerable people who were probably already, if they didn't get COVID and they got the flu, the same thing was going to happen. And they're trying to have this of versus with debate. But if you're going to use that measurement during COVID, you got to use it during the flu. You got to use it for everything. Because most definitely, if my granddad, when he had stage 4 terminal liver cancer, got a bad flu, he would have died of pneumonia. But it's stage 4 cancer that kills him. That's what no one goes around saying the flu killed my granddad. And so in COVID, we completely changed that. My granddad died of stage 4 liver cancer. Oh, but he died of COVID. You know what I mean? Like, this is why this sort of shit is why we're seeing a bit of a drop in trust, because of very simple conversations. And yes, I know it's more nuanced than that, and there's a little bit more to it. But shutting down that as just completely stupid, that's contributing to the levels of distrust that we see in our health authorities. I'm going to read something that's not going to read the whole article, but this means a lot to me because I've gone through something very similar, and I'll talk about our situation in a moment. My organs shut down. Now I'm in a wheelchair. The lives ruined by COVID jabs. 6 years later, the true scale of vaccine side effects is emerging. Yet those coping with life-changing conditions remain ignored. Having been a dental nurse for more than a decade, Nicola Brindley was familiar with vaccination requirements for... Oh, do you know what? I'm going to have to stop this. They've put the rest of this article behind a paywall. Thanks, The Telegraph. But basically, let's go through my mum's situation. Okay, so my mum is a vaccine injured. My mum got vaccine. My mum is part of the COVID vaccine injury list. Yet, if you were to ask authorities, she is not. My mother worked in healthcare, and to keep her job, she was required to get a vaccination, even though she had already had COVID prior to vaccination, and that there were reports that natural immunity was more effective than the actual vaccines that were available, 27% more effective and longer lasting. Yet my mum was forced into getting a vaccination. Now, my mum had also my mum also had been told that if she was to travel, she would require a vaccination. I asked my mum to hold out and wait because they were going over to Thailand back to live. She didn't even need to keep her job, but she felt the pressures of the coercive government at the time. My mum had the vaccine and then within a week or two started complaining about a bit of a sore stomach. Didn't want to ruin their plans to go live in Thailand again. And so she just was like, well, I just got a bit of a stomach ache. I'm going to go to Thailand. She went to Thailand. Things didn't go great. Her stomach pain got worse and worse and worse. And what had happened was she had a blood clot in her stomach and a blood clot in her lungs. And this had been so severe that she now required surgery to remove, I think, almost 50% of her intestines. I can't remember specifically what. I think it was intestines. And she was given a less than, because of her condition, a less than 50% chance of survival. She had to do it in Thailand because she couldn't fly because she was in such a severe condition. I had to talk to my mum over the phone that night as they were going to rush her into surgery, and I had to say goodbye to my mum. And then I had to call my brothers and tell them to call their mum to say goodbye to your mum just in case she doesn't get through the night. It's fucking horror. Horrible. Fortunately, my mum got through the surgery. She's a fucking warrior. She's a fighter. The surgery was a success. But unfortunately, because of the conditions of the hospital, she developed a infection, a blood infection, candida, I think it's called. That made things far worse. She then had to go to another hospital and have another surgery. So again, my mum was given a small chance of surviving overnight. And so again, me and my brothers and my dad had to have a conversation with my mum where we said goodbye, which is a conversation no one should have. It's interesting because, you know, you get to finally say the things that you should be saying to your parents and to your loved ones all the time, only you don't do it. And I'm glad I got to say those things to my mum and that I love her so much and that she was an incredible parent. And she did everything she knew she could. And then I love her so much. And then, yeah, you shouldn't have to have these conversations. Eventually it got to the point where we flew over. My brothers had been there for a few weeks at their own expense. And I went over to visit my mum and seen that she was not in a good way and that we had to do everything we could to get her back home. And so this whole process has cost us upwards of about $70,000 or $80,000 to get her home. We get her home. We get her to the hospital. She's in hospital for nearly, I want to say, 12 months. Like, this whole process was horrific. Surgery after surgery, not being able to leave a bed. Blood infections, blood clots in the lungs, blood clots in the stomach, and being gaslit by the medical professionals saying it couldn't have been the vaccine because AstraZeneca doesn't cause blood clots. Only to then, I think months later, have AstraZeneca removed because of the issues that it was creating regarding blood clots, specifically in the lungs and the stomach. But because we didn't have that as a report as the initial cause, we can't claim that the vaccine caused this issue in my mum because they were denying it from early stages, saying it's just one of those things. Now, in hindsight, if my mum had have had some sort of genetic testing prior to the vaccine, she would have known that she had a genetic condition, a genetic predisposition that made her far more susceptible to things like blood clots. And we wouldn't have got the vaccine. She would have been provided alternative routes. Yet this was not supplied. This wasn't subsidized. It comes at your own expense and cost and your own burden. But the government was very happy to put the burden on you if you didn't get vaccinated. They were happy to remove your privileges and rights, but they weren't going to do that to provide some sort of assurance like a genetic test prior to getting vaccinated. They just did the blanket statement. Now, the issue obviously is governments are going to be given their information from medical professionals and they don't know what the fuck they're doing. They're just given the information and they do as they're told. But the fact that you would genuinely think about a situation like this, even your own logic and reasoning would understand that there is genetic diversity, there is biodiversity that goes on. Not everyone is going to have the same reaction to a medication. And that to coerce a collective into having this medical intervention without considering the implications of those actions and saying it's for the greater good is very... It's irresponsible. You're meant to be the people who represent us, not pharmaceutical companies. Like, how do we get to this point? We are clearly prioritizing and pushing a narrative of a pharmaceutical company that's there just to profit, turn the biggest profit in their history. It's plain and obvious for everyone to see. Whether you want to say they orchestrated it from the beginning or whether they just capitalized on a tragedy or a situation where they could, it doesn't matter. It's horrible. I shouldn't have to be in that situation. Millions of other people around the world shouldn't have to be in that situation. And for anyone to look at someone like me, my mum, and other people affected and to suggest that it was for the greater good and we didn't know what we were doing, that's an interesting take. That's an interesting position to have. Now, this comes further than COVID because we're seeing this gaslighting. We're seeing this shaming of people, not just with COVID vaccinations. We're seeing that with real life childhood schedule programs. We are seeing that play out. Parents with real, logical, they're not conspiracy theorists, They have real logical concerns about what's happened to their children directly as a result of vaccination. And they are completely disregarded and shamed for having that. How do you think that makes them feel? Genuinely. We're looking at some serious numbers here. Look at this one. 79.4% of babies who died of SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome, have a vaccine on the same day. Now, I'm not suggesting that 79.4% all died because of the vaccinations. But that is a very, very big, that's a screaming signal to be worthy of investigation. Let me have a look at this. I'll show you 1,244 child reports with available death certificates. Autopsy reports included sudden infant death syndrome, asphyxia, septicemia, pneumonia, and among 526 adult reports, most common cause of death included diseases of circulatory, respiratory systems, and certain infections of parasitic diseases, and malignant neoplasms. For child death reports, 79.4% received a vaccine on the same day as their death. This is why things like the no jab, no pay concept are horrific coercion. It is breaking the Nuremberg Code. You are not meant to force people into having a fucking medical intervention. And why aren't they safety tested? People say, they're tested for safety. They're not tested for safety. Not the double-blind controlled placebo studies that everyone seems to think is the gold standard in studies. And when questioned and asked about this, why don't they do that? Well, the answer is now, it's not ethical to do so because we have a society in which we think we have enough data to show that they're not just efficacious, or they don't just have efficacy, they're also safe. So it would be unethical for us to take a number of children and subject them to potentially getting these diseases if we don't have to. Because if you don't vaccinate them, they're going to get them. That's their stance on it. It's unethical. My thing would be, why wouldn't you do these studies to begin with? And also, just my thoughts. And don't take this as fact and whatever, but these studies that they suggest make us understand that these are safe. They're based on reporting systems. And I find that very interesting because the time in which you vaccinate versus when a situation becomes evident that it's affecting you, like chronic illness or something like autism. If you have a vaccine when you're a child, symptoms of chronic disease and things like autism and ADHD, they don't appear for another or become they don't become evident for years down the track. And so we don't have a causation link. We don't have they had the vaccine and then the next day they started doing this. So they don't even regard it as a potential process in beginning what is a chronic illness. So I don't buy the fact, personally, I don't buy the fact that these reportings show that it's safe. I can get behind the fact that you can show that it's got efficacy, maybe, because you're disregarding other things like hygiene when things are brought in. We look at the data of like diseases of deaths per 100, and polio, for example, it's brought in that the vaccine isn't brought in until it's basically eradicated. Are we disregarding things like natural immunity? Yeah. These are real conversations. These are real conversations. And by silencing these concerns and these conversations, you're just contributing more to distrust. And because that could be creating a bigger health pandemic. You're silencing of real conversation and concerns, because then eventually people go, well, I do not trust you. And potentially things that would be saving lives will not be used because there's no trust anymore. So we need to have these conversations, whether or not you think they're causing it or not. We need to have open conversations about these. And this is why it's obviously very important to have transparency. It's transparency and these, when it comes to things like conflict of interest, 96% of the TGA, the Therapeutic Goods Association in Australia, is funded by Big Pharma itself. That's a conflict of interest. And I understand that they need to fund it so they can actually get the test done to make sure it's safe. But we need transparency. You need to have transparency. The Freedom of Information Acts that we're seeing being denied or hidden, these sorts of this data and information, that is another example of distrust and another example of why we're finding distrust. Here's a thing. I'm going to listen to a clip about the CDC talking about trying to get information on the myocarditis post-COVID vaccination. Have a listen.
I find information like this, inserts for the vaccine. Paper's there and there's nothing printed on it. I find that very interesting, disheartening, disgusting, and lots of other words. But then it gets better. It just keeps, wait, there's more. It just keeps happening. The CDC redacts every single word of a 148-page study on a myocarditis after COVID vaccination. So I asked research to print the study for me. 148 pages. The entire thing is redacted. What good does a study do if there's nothing there? Then I want to know, wait, what might have been there that they needed to redact it? That's even scarier.
That is a horrific way to show transparency. The CDC provides a study on myocarditis post-COVID vaccination, and they redact 148 pages out of 148. There's no transparency. You wonder why we have a fall in trust, why the distrust in medical intervention is at a low. It's things like this. When we ask you to provide transparency and show us that there is no things to concern ourselves about when there very clearly is, that is what is contributing to the distrust. I want to point to something else, and a lot of people don't like hearing this one. There's a documentary that's recently come out called An Inconvenient Study, and there's a couple of studies talked about. Firstly, I'm going to talk about the Mawson et 2017 study. Now, the sample size and there's a few issues with these studies, and I obviously am aware of that. But there's 666 children studied, 405 vaccinated, 261 unvaccinated. Neurodevelopmental outcomes. So the neurodevelopmental disorders, vaccinated had 5.3% of them, unvaccinated 1.4%. That's 3 to 4 times higher. ADHD 4.2%, unvaccinated 0.4%. That's 10 times higher. Learning disability 3.7%, unvaccinated 1.1%. And autism, this was very small numbers. They only had one case, and that was in the vaccinated, so can't really be regarded. This is where I find a huge difference, and I think is probably something that does need to be considered and really thought about, because long-term studies on chronic illness and allergies and immune responses is something that is a big concern. We look at allergic rhinitis, which is basically hay fever, vaccinated 10.4%, unvaccinated 0.4%. That's 25 times higher. Eczema, vaccinated 7.9%, unvaccinated 1.1%. And chronic illness overall, just generally speaking, vaccinated 44% of people who were vaccinated had chronic illness, and unvaccinated 25%. So that's a huge difference. Now, these studies have flaws, but it's definitely worth looking at because they're sort of anecdotal. Another one, population of 18,468 children over the time frame of the year 2000 to 2016, and the location of Henry Ford Health System. Vaccinated children was 16,511. Unvaccinated was 1,957. what the study claimed was vaccinated kids had about a 2 to 3 higher chance of chronic conditions and 2.5 increased likelihood of chronic illness. Specific conditions, asthma, eczema, autoimmune conditions, and neurodevelopmental disorders. Some secondary analysis reports claimed that there was a 5% increase in certain neurodevelopmental type symptoms. This report showed that neurodevelopmental disorders were 1,254% more likely increased. Autism was 180% more. Cancer, 54%. Autoimmune disease, 1,120% more. Motor disability, 810%. Speech disorder, 803%. Mental health disorders, 696%. Asthma, 553%. Developmental delay, 412%. Atopic disease, 386%, seizure disorder, 216%, food allergies, 128%, neurological disorder, 26%, and any chronic condition, a 250% increase. And with these other ones, there's 0 cases. So not necessarily an increase, but 0 cases for the group in this huge study. There was 0 cases in the unvaccinated for ADHD, diabetes, brain dysfunction, behavioural disability, learning disability, intellectual disability, tics, and other psychological disabilities. That's 22 out of 22 categories worse in the vaccinated children. And then we need to talk about things like 1 in 10,000 in autism. So 1 in 10,000 kids 50, 60 years ago had autism. Now 1 in 32 have autism. We do have to understand that, yes, our ways of identifying and seeing symptoms have improved, and that has definitely attributed to more of this. We also have to think about the fact that there are environmental factors, food, genetically passing it on, and I think all of those sorts of things do need to be considered. It's not just a simple flat out, here's the reason, it's because of vaccines. But it has to be considered because as they've increased, so has autism. And to suggest that autism isn't increasing is probably just as dangerous as to suggest that it's increasing only because of vaccines. But again, it is a conversation that needs to be had, and by silencing these conversations and saying that you looking into these and asking these questions and wanting to see science and data showing that why we have a rise in autism and neurodevelopmental diseases and chronic illness shouldn't be considered a conspiracy theory. It should be considered normal. We need to have a look at it. We need to have an understanding as to why. It could be a variety of things. Our diets are horrific. The standard American or the standard Australian diet is, if you go and look at the Health Star rating in your local Coles or Woolies, they're completely flipped upside down. RFK flipping the food pyramid upside down is the greatest thing I've seen. Eat real food. Stop eating shit in a packet. That's a good way to fucking start. But regardless, it's a conversation that needs to be had. And my real concern about all of this is the fact that we're not allowed to have these conversations. People might look at this chat and go, oh, that's a controversial take. Some of them will. But as we see, 43% of adults, of parents, now have concerns about vaccinations, whether it completely avoiding vaccinations, specifically picking specific vaccinations to avoid, or delaying the timing to give their kids longer to develop. Whatever the choice, there is a mainstream buy-in to concern around vaccines, and that I completely understand why there's been this campaign by the government to increase vaccinations. Because they're just presented information. They're just puppets. They don't know. They don't know what they're talking. They're not doctors. And even if they are, they're fucking they're presented the information that's presented by the pharmaceutical companies themselves. And this is why we need transparency. We don't need 148 pages of redacted information. We need real information. But I want to say, as a parent of, I want to say as a parent right now, that you have the right to be concerned and you have the right to be diligent in your choices regarding your childhood vaccine schedule. You shouldn't be coerced by a government saying that we will withhold subsidies for your childcare if you don't get vaccinated. You should be able to make your decisions based on what's best for you, your family, and how you want to live your life. And any involvement in the government over your health, as we've seen during COVID, should be regarded as an infringement on your own rights as a human, as found in their own investigation into the handling of COVID. So don't feel like you are in the minority. You are now in a silent majority. As we see now, 43% of parents who are willing to even talk about this have concerns. That's the latest data. 43% of parents have concerns about vaccinations, and rightfully so. And honestly, that is because conversations around this subject are generally shut down. So if we can be more open and have a chat about the realities of concerns, the realities that parents are witnessing at home and being shamed for expressing, maybe then we can start to move forward. It's good to see Senate hearings. It's good to see that it's become a mainstream concern. And it doesn't stop by silencing yourself. Self-censorship is the goal, to make you feel embarrassed to have these concerns because you feel like no one else thinks the same as you. But let me tell you right now, I see it. I get the messages. I see the data. I see the numbers. Everyone else feels the same. Anyway, those are my concerns, and what I truly believe we need to have more conversations about is the vaccine childhood schedule. We need to have a look into some safety studies, and hopefully we see improvements there, because honestly, I believe that we can live in a world where vaccines are both safe and effective. Anyway, hope you enjoyed that one. I try not to get too angry, and I think it was a lot better, eh? Hope you enjoyed this episode, and Delby's back soon. We can talk about his trip over to the UK and what they did with the, what do you call it, Britain's Got Talent. And I got a baby coming soon. I got a baby coming due in less than a month. So I'm fucking excited. And all of these things are things I need to deal with. So anyway, just remember, always be vigilant. Always be diligent. Look harder. And thanks for listening.